what's great about this youngest generation of veterans, they are involved in their community. Yeah. They come out and they're involved, and they said, we're standing up, we need a change.
And they're running for office, which
Absolutely.
I think is important as well. So we will be back on The Point talking about games and gamers and how that affects our military mind. Welcome back to The Point. Michael Shure with you. We're joined by Mike Prysner, an Iraq War veteran, Sheryl Shaffer, who was a personnel specialist in the Women's Army Corps from 1968 to 1971. Robert Vaughn, to my right, was is the California State Coordinator for the Ron Paul presidential campaign and a former aviation technician in the U.S. Navy. Guys, I want to talk now about something that is not necessarily off subject. I want to talk about video games and the way that video games have possibly desensitized us to what the military does, and you know, whether they are an instrument in making military action even more distant to the average American. In the same way, you know, I think that we get desensitized to crime from things like, Grand Theft Auto. When I hear about a game like Call of Duty, I think, wait a second, is this too much? And then is the military learning from the games? Are the games learning from the military? We can talk about drones. I want to know all about this. Sheryl, you don't strike me as a gamer, but I learned that you are, in fact, a gamer. And I want to know what you feel as someone who has been both in the military and on the couch, if you feel that it desensitizes people.
I think so, but only to a certain extent, because it is just a game. Reality is completely different. So you have scenarios that are built into this game to obtain a certain objective, to win that fake battle. It's a good thing in teaching, you know, in the military they use a lot of the younger veterans, active duty people that are gamers, because they have quick eye-hand coordination, and when you're operating a drone, because a lot of really expert gamers go into operating the drones,
right? They're
sitting in a remote base. They're not actually in a war situation, but they're in war. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense.
But coming back to reality in a war, one of the subjects I would like to kind of talk about a little bit is what's happening with the women in the active duty military right now. Because you talk about, you know, we see a lot of these welcome home stories with women veterans coming back to their family, but the real dirty little secret that the military does not want the general public to know is military sexual trauma and PTSD, and how it is devastating this generation of women veterans. If you are a woman in the active duty military and you have been raped, if you stand up and say something happened, there goes your military career. A lot of these women aren't even reporting this. There have been 19,000 reported sexual assaults within the last 10 years.
Well, you know, I think in keeping it to the point, which is talking about games and talking about the effect of, you know, but I don't think that it veers too far when you talk about desensitization, because there's so much that happens in the military that none of us know about, but there's so much that happens in the military that makes us numb to its actual occurrence. So when you hear about these 19,000 reported cases of rape, of course we would assume that there are more that go unreported, because in society alone there are. But I guess it sort of feeds the argument here. Is that desensitization to what women go through, to what gays in the military go through, is the desensitization mirrored at all in the way that we play games? And it's almost hard for me to say that with a straight face, Mike, because to compare a video game to these real issues that Sheryl's talking about, that we're all talking about, it seems a little trivial. But the truth is, that's an instrument, and so many people who are going into our Army and our Navy and our military right now are playing these games. So is there a disconnect now? We're so disconnected from so much.
Well, I don't think that it desensitizes people, because in order for it to desensitize people, it would have to, in fact, reflect reality, which it does not. What these games do is it convinces young people that this is something that they want to do. They want to go be this action hero in this other country, and that what they play in games actually does represent reality. If it showed you the reality, it would show you ripping families apart in the middle of the night. It would show people being tortured in detention facilities. It would show the civilian casualties, dead children, the real aftermath of war. It'd show you your best friend shooting himself in the middle of the night because he couldn't deal with the trauma. This is the reality of military service. But I think really, one of the aspects of these video games that really, is truly disgusting is that these are taking place, games like Call of Duty that take place in the Mideast theater of war, where you're shooting these, faceless, demons and things like that. The dehumanization of the people abroad. These are countries that today and actively are decimated and destroyed by the effects of the war. That's what's not shown in the video game. In Iraq, over 1.3 million people were killed. In Afghanistan, tens of thousands and more every day. So the game that is supposed to be separate from reality are taking place in places that are completely devastated with the worst humanitarian crises, the worst catastrophes of this era.
So, hearing what Mike just said, it all makes sense, and it's all really true. Do these games just trivialize? Should they? I don't want to say they should be illegal or that I'm for censorship, but don't they trivialize what war really is, and aren't they dangerous to that extent?
I don't think so. I really don't think so, because gamers know they're playing a game. It's just a game.
Well, I see what you're saying. People know that it's just a game, just like they know it's just an actor on the screen. But Old Yeller still makes you cry. So there's something that is real that affects us about them.
I'm a gamer too, and as a gamer, I see the progressions of game. I remember Pong.
Yeah.
That was the first video game, just two paddles and a thing going across.
Finally, a game that I actually played. Yeah.
And the real part about it is I used to play a lot of these military games, and they used to be like Sub Chaser, and it was always World War II. And as he says, the Call of Duty and these new games coming out, and even what they call America's Armies, which is basically an army recruiting tool. It's run by the Army. Has its own website. People can go on and do the first game shooters.
Well, so there we go. Then it is reality, and then you look at all this sort of advanced military warfare. You look at drone planes flying over Yemen. Drone planes are essentially a video game.
But as Michael pointedly said, they don't get the realistic aftermath of what war is. When I knew when I was playing Sub Hunter or these World War II games, this is over. But I also knew people who lived during that time. And they were never the same as they were before they came.
And it's not just that as well, because it's on one hand to say that it doesn't reflect the actual reality of what's going on. And so when you actually go to war, you don't come back when you die. You can't take a lot of damage. You're just dead. Your friends are dead, and people that you shouldn't be fighting are dead also. But the overarching thing in all of these games is this aspect of this hyper-patriotism, of this over-glorification of military service, of combat. And what that's telling young people, what it's telling people in this country, is that the wars that the U.S. is engaged in, and that when we're sending our brothers and sisters in uniform abroad, that what they are doing is necessary, what they are doing is just, what they are doing is brave, and it's honorable. And that's a complete distortion of reality. These are wars that the majority of people do not support. They're wars that are catastrophes for the civilian population, and wars that are exposed as being based on nothing but lies. And the real rationale, of course, is much more sinister.
Yeah, that's a great point. And while you were talking, it made me want to ask this question of the three of you, not entirely off subject, but going to what Mike was just saying. These wars, what should our role be? The three of you have served at different times and in different ways in the military. I'm going to ask you specifically about Syria right now, because I've noticed that we have done nothing in Syria, that the world has done nothing and sort of stood by while Syria sort of burns, really. And it is no different, other than the fact that they have no oil in Syria, it is no different than any of the other countries that have enjoyed an Arab Spring, that have enjoyed our support, our allies. As someone who served in the military, and I know you'll have a specific point on this, being just knowing that your sort of libertarian views on these things. Also, I'll start with you. Should we just sit here and let Syria deal with Syria?
I think the people of Syria need to deal with Syria, and this is what it took in our own country about revolution. When the egregious, the government gets so egregious that they have to rise up and take back themselves. In Iraq, we had a totally different situation. The people in Iraq weren't rising up to throw Saddam Hussein out. No, you know, that there was no real support for our troops to go into and say, we're going to liberate you.
Yeah.
Just like in World War II, we were liberating them from Nazi occupation.
Yeah.
Right now, we sort of see that with the Arab Spring, you know, going, but do we commit our troops that are we're already stretched too thin? I mean, we have endless warfare and endless welfare.
Why are we the world's policemen? Why is it up to us to solve all these nations' problems?
Well, I asked that, and it's a good question. When do you go from being a policeman to someone who's maybe it says beautiful things about our country, that we see human rights violations and we see a murderous regime and we want to go in and help. So there's another way of looking at as being people who go in and help rather than being a murderous regime. But again, I don't want to send somebody in to go do that and put them in harm's way. So it becomes a difficult Good Samaritan type thing. And Mike, I saw you wanted to answer when I...
Sure. I mean, I think the U.S. government does want regime change in Syria. I think that there are actions taking place that are fostering civil war in Syria, that are creating the conditions for intervention. But I think, you know, you can look at all these different countries and instances in isolation, but we have to keep in mind the real role of the U.S. Military in the world, the real role of the United States in the world as this military superpower. And as much as people would like to think and hope that it's possible, there is no possible way that in this current system, with this current government, with the current people who are really pulling the strings, the big banks and corporations, there is no such thing as a humanitarian intervention on behalf of the U.S. military. There are countless examples in the past that prove that to be true, and the same is true today. Any amount of intervention by the United States has ulterior motives.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to say that because I look at it as a game. You know, I look at them sitting back and say, yes, we won't go to Tunisia, but we will go to Libya. We will go to Egypt, but we're not going to go to Syria. And you know, not being a gamer myself, and not, again, to reiterate, being ever in the military, that's how I sort of see them doing this, sitting back, deciding what to do, the same way you would sit back and choose a game or choose a chapter on your joystick and go and advance that way. So that's why it's amazing to me, the tie from the video game and Call of Duty to the actual game that they're playing in deciding where to go in, where to intervene. I also, when it comes to the games, I find them, you know, there's a racist element to it too, which we haven't touched on. I think we're doing a disservice to the conversation without touching on it a little bit. It is what it does, because it desensitizes people to the differences in the world.
Absolutely, and you know, I alluded to it earlier in the opening of this segment. The dehumanization factor, these faceless monsters in these video games that aren't really people, and this isn't just through video games, but this is through military training from day one when you're in basic training, through the media, through these Islamophobic things that are put out, the anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bigotry that is so pervasive in American culture, but especially in the military. And this has a very specific purpose. It's been used since we were trying to justify the slave trade, trying to justify the Vietnam War, the slaughter of the Native Americans. Racism and dehumanization is an essential tool because it's saying to service members, kill these people because they're not really people, or kill these people because they're nothing like you, they're nothing like your families, we're something different. But the reason that so many service members turned against the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, like in all the wars in the past, and became activists against the wars is because they realized that they had everything in common with the people that they were being told to kill and the people that were ordering them to kill. They realized they didn't have anything in common with those millionaire politicians and their billionaire buddies on Wall Street.
That's where you get your first case of a bleeding heart, I guess, and that's how it happens. So Michael Prysner, I give you the last point on The Point this week. Thank you all. It's been enlightening, especially for me, who has not had this perspective before and has not been able to share with so many different experiences in this way. Michael Prysner from March Forward, Sheryl Shaffer, who is working now with a group called Veterans Helping Veterans and can be seen on Blip TV. Robert Vaughn, again you're with the Californians for Ron Paul this year, and you're also doing work with the Liberty wing of the Republican Party. Is there anything else that any of you want to say about projects that you're involved with specifically?
Sure. Well, as we've addressed in this segment, it's a really dire situation for service members today. It's an urgent situation where so many are dying, both at home in garrison and deployed in the war that is wildly unpopular in the military and in the United States and in Afghanistan as well. As I said earlier, the only solution to this isn't waiting for the politicians. It's soldiers and veterans ourselves organizing together, taking action, refusing to take part in that criminal, immoral war, and advocating for our own interests. That's what we're doing in March Forward. You can go to marchforward.org, read lots of other testimonies. But also, if you're a service member or a vet, we need you because we have the strength in numbers, and we're the ones that are really going to be winning things in our interests.
Sheryl Shaffer.
Join AMVETS, join any veteran service organization. That's how legislation is changed.
There's an organization, if I don't mention it, I probably get spanked. It's the Oath Keepers, and that's one group that actually believe in supporting their oath of office. We're also raising money through California Freedom PAC to support liberty ideas, liberty candidates, and non-interventionist foreign policy candidates and political action.
Sounds like great work, Robert. Thank you. I'm Michael Shure. You can see me on Current TV's The Young Turks, weeknights on Current, and on the Young Turks Network hosting 2012 until the election, maybe even a little bit afterwards. Thanks for watching The Point.
When I got out of the military, like thousands of other veterans of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, I decided to exercise the only type of real democracy we have in this country, and that's exercising democracy in the streets through taking part in mass action, civil disobedience, protest actions that really challenged what this government was trying to do. And I'm joined by many thousands of other veterans and active duty personnel who have done the same exact thing. And what you're saying about the idea of this lack of resources and this 1% kind of controlling things, I mean, they're telling us that they can't provide a jobs program for veterans. They can't provide adequate disability compensation or adequate mental health treatment because it's an issue of resources, right? There's just not enough money, as they really like to say. But when it comes to the defense contractors, of course, there's a blank check for that brand new fancy piece of equipment that service members know does absolutely nothing useful, or its only use is blowing up lots of innocent human beings. So the resources are out there. The resources are just locked up with a very small group of people who are getting very, very rich off of the war, while people like us are the ones who are suffering.
Going to what Mike said, I mean, the most sort of enraging part of this is that people are making money off of these wars. Defense contractors, private contractors, the profiteers that are making money, and yet we're not able to give a bedpan to a returning soldier. I mean, that to me, that is the 99-1 that I'm talking about.
The real crisis today is inside the U.S. military, whereas there is an epidemic of suicides, where more active duty service members are killing themselves than are being killed in combat in Afghanistan. That's a really shocking number, and that's happening because the military brass, the generals, the battalion commanders are refusing to care for soldiers in any meaningful way, not just refusing to care for them, but actively denying them treatment.